Good to see so many people here, not surprised, but wonderful to have a full house as we get started and continuing in this, what I guess this is the fourth and final of our installation of coming to God or coming to your spirituality through the arts. And I will tell you, it is my delight, my pleasure, my privilege to introduce our speaker for this morning. Some of you will have already been at the 9 o'clock and heard a wonderful sermon. Those who have not yet gone to church will come and hear, I'm sure. I'm just going to name it and claim it now. Another wonderful sermon at the 11 o'clock. Just a little bit about Roger Ferlo, who is our speaker. He's got a very long CV. I will not stun you by reading it.
I'm just old.
He's been around long enough to do some things, and he's very good when he does things. The utterance of his name first came to my ear when I myself was in seminary up here at Seabury Western, and I had a very good friend named John Mers. Can't believe I blanked on his last name. And John Mers was the quintessential Brooklynite. He was a carpenter, if you can believe it, and then on any number of things. Very eccentric, very passionate young man, and absolutely miserable in his time here in the Midwest. He was born and bred in New York. For some reason, his bishop thought it was a good idea to send him to Seabury Western, I think attempting to civilize him and tone down his New York. It didn't work, and all I heard was all about, this is just absolutely a disgrace. You should hear my rector back home at my church in the village. What was it? St. Luke the Fields. St. Luke the Fields. Roger Ferlo is amazing. So Roger Ferlo, what he would do with the scriptures, blah, 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 blah. So I heard about all these sermons from this guy named Roger Ferlo while I was in my first year of seminary, and of course struggling my own way through that year. But Roger Ferlo, I just knew if I could just ever meet this man, life would be better. And so I did actually eventually meet him, and as happens in the church, way leads to way, and we crisscrossed paths. I had the pleasure of being at a clergy day in Cleveland, Ohio, and Roger came and shared with us an amazing reflection on a piece of art. Was it the Ascension?
It was the
Transfiguration.
Yes.
Yes, and then we had another quiet day at my church, and we were treated to George Herbert and Morris. What was it? No.
That was George Herbert.
Yeah, George Herbert, and the Dappled Light guy.
The what?
Dappled Light man. It's just like on the tip of my tongue.
Jordan Manley Hopkins.
That's it, Jordan Manley Hopkins. That's it. And so so I knew of the riches of this man's mind. I also knew he was here in Chicago. He's gone on and taught at several, it feels like, seminaries. Most recently retired from being the president of Bexley Seabury Seminary. And so many, many things to teach us. So I'm going to stop talking so he can start with that. I did reach out to him and said, would you do something on poetry and all that? And he said, well, I just happened to have been sitting around thinking about all these poets who are kind of reading Dante, and I thought I might do something about poets reading Dante in a world on fire. Would that do? I said it absolutely would do. So with that, please help me welcome Roger Ferlo.
It's so great. Thank you. You did too much. John Mers is a character.
Yes.
And it's wonderful that that's our link. Nel mezzo del cammino nostro vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura e la dritta via era smarrita. First three lines in front of the most famous poems of the Middle Ages, Dante's Inferno. This is a photograph of just a small segment of shelves at the Seminary Co-op bookstore to show you there has been some amazing resurgence of interest in Dante's poetry in these postmodern days. This is just two shelves. I mean, they go up and down and around. And one of the amazing things about the last 20 years or so, especially in the English-speaking countries, is the way in which contemporary poets find inspiration and shape and form in translating Dante. And so what I want to do today is a little bit of, first thing I want to look at is the challenge of translating this poem. The challenges are manifold, but then also the attraction of this poem. And so I'll take you through the first couple of verses. in English and Italian. I'm going to actually have you speak a little Italian, even though, does anyone here speak Italian? Because go away if you do, okay? Because I'm going to have you all speak Italian. Just to get a sense of the sound, because poetry is it's not just words on the page. There's an oral aspect of poetry that's crucial, especially if you're a working poet trying to translate from another language. Because there are ways in which you can emulate the other language, but you cannot reproduce it. You have to, in some ways, use your language to make a kind of equivalent to this. So what is it about Dante? Let's just start. These are the opening lines of Inferno. I should say, by the way, whenever I say I'm going to teach Dante, everyone says, "Oh yeah, the Inferno. I know that." Dante's poem has 3 parts. There's the Inferno, but you don't stay there. Okay, you work your way down in order to work your way up. And in the Purgatorio, Dante invents a purgatory. That is, there was a purgatory belief in the Middle Ages, and it was pretty harsh. I grew up Roman Catholic. I didn't want to go to purgatory, but then I didn't want to go to hell either. So purgatory was going to be the next best thing. But Dante reimagined it completely, and he imagined the world as a globe. He imagined the world as a globe with land on only one side of the globe. The rest is water. And when Satan fell from the sky, when Satan was thrown out of heaven, Dante imagines that he lands near Jerusalem. But he lands so hard that he creates a kind of cone crevice in the globe, and then the force of that point on the other end of the globe that was all water makes a mountain. A mountain. Who's ever read Thomas Burton's 7-Story Mountain? That's the mountain of purgatory, and it has 7 circles on it. And the farther up you go on the mountain of purgatory, the less burden you have of your previous sins. The worst sin takes the longest time. What do you think the worst sin is? Come on, you're Americans. Lust. But it's not. It's pride. It's pride. The worst sin is pride. It takes you a long, long time. And finally you graduate. And you go through the gate, and you have 7 marks on your forehead. And every time you pass one circle, one of the marks disappears. So you get lighter and lighter as you go up. You know what the least distant circle is? Lust. Lust. Okay? The big crime is pride and greed. Hello, welcome to America these days. Pride and greed are the worst crimes. Sex is just, everybody has it, and everybody goes through it. When you go through a wall of fire as a pilgrim, you know where you end up? Eden. Dante imagines that the earthly paradise is at the pinnacle of the purgatorial mountain. And so once you're in the Garden of Eden, he then meets his great love, Beatrice, who had died when they were teenagers, but she is now the embodiment of beatitude. And Beatrice first scolds him for having done everything he did in his life. And then it's like science fiction after that. We're finished with the Purgatorio, and the third book of the Divine Comedy is the Paradiso. And that's like science fiction, because Beatrice sort of grabs Dante, and they sort of launch into the 7 spheres, the Aristotelian cosmos. And they go through each planet in turn, and they finally get to the Empyrean and the divine vision. And it's a wonderful thing in this poem, because Dante has no words at the end of the poem. This poem that has thousands and thousands and thousands of lines, he has no language to describe what he sees. So, anytime somebody says, you've been reading Dante, don't let him say, oh yeah, I know about the Inferno. Tell him, I know about the Purgatorial Mountain. So, that's what we got. And the other thing to say about this, and then we're going to look at this poem, is that Dante was obsessed with the number 3. With the number 3. Now, if you're a Christian and obsessed with the number 3, what do you have in mind? The Trinity. Okay. So, in some ways, the Trinity is everywhere in this, but reflected in the very structure of the poem. There are 3 canticles, as they're called, there is Inferno, there's Purgatorio, and there's Paradiso. Each of those canticles is divided into 33 cantos, okay? Everyone sort of is 33, 33, 33. The 33 cantos have a rhyme scheme that is 3 lines at a time. 3 lines at a time. Tercets. Okay? And that's where we're going to start and sort of say, how do we translate this poem? But just remember, it's full of the Trinity. It's, anything you do, you can't get away from number 3. So, let's see how you're Italians. On the front of your sheet, the first page, okay? I just want you to say after me the first 3 lines, okay? You ready for this? You're gonna be good. You're gonna be good. Be brave, all right? Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, nel mezzo di cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Che la diritta via era smarrita. Say the line again. Che la diritta via era smarrita. Only listening to it, what sounds do you hear? Ia, right? Che la diritta via era smarrita. So already you're in an Italian soundscape. Okay, maybe you're an English poet trying to come to terms with this. Okay. The other thing is you notice that they're in 3s. So now mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovavo nella sala oscura, perché la diritta via era period, and then usually there's a little indentation because we're now to the next tercet. I quando a Dio quando. So there's 3, 3, 3, 3. But now they're rhymed. And Italian is different from English. It is easy to rhyme in Italian because most words end in a vowel. And in a vowel, vita, smarrita, dura, paura, trovai, indrai, punto, giunto. Rhyme after rhyme after rhyme. But Dante organizes his rhymes. Not only is this set in 3s, but the 3s are linked in a very interesting way. Take a look. If you look again, notice the first line ends in what word? Vita, which means life. The third line ends in what word? Smarrita, which means lost. Okay? So already we got life lost. So the rhymes actually have significance to the plot of the story. Vita, smarrita. But what about that second line? What's the last word in the second line? Oscura. What does that rhyme with? The first line of the next tercet, dura. Notice that? And then if you look at dura, that rhymes with paura, but it doesn't rhyme with forte, but forte rhymes with morte. Forte means strong, morte means death. I'm sorry, just stand back. Dante is incredible. He sustains this over thousands and thousands of lines. But one of the things about this rhyme scheme, which is almost impossible to do in English, because we don't have that kind of rhyming, is that you can never stop reading. The poem always impels you forward. You have de nostra vita, selva oscura, smarrita, cosa dura. Wait a minute, cosa dura. Then you have to keep going because cosa dura is going to rhyme with paura, but forte is going to rhyme with morte, and morte is going to rhyme with scorte, but doesn't rhyme with trovai, but trovai rhymes with insights. It just keeps going and going and going and going. It's a form of poetry that impels you toward what Aristotle would call the telos, the goal. And what is the goal of this poem? The divine vision at the end of the Paradiso. It's extraordinary. This is a journey. It's literally a journey down to the center of the earth, where, by the way, Satan sort of fell from heaven and he went on. He's actually encased up to his waist in ice at the very center of the earth. Okay, but Dante, who imagined himself as a pilgrim. I'm going to say Dante the pilgrim as opposed to Dante the poet. He is guided there by Virgil, the great Roman poet. And when they get to the center, Virgil knows that if there's a little opening at Satan's thigh, and they actually use the hairs on Satan's thigh to climb down his thigh through a tiny opening, that when they go through the center of the earth, they suddenly find themselves going upside down.
because that's what happens. And then they climb down, and so that climbing down is actually climbing up. And when they come to the top, they see this mountain and the beautiful coastline of the shore. It's an amazing imagination. You see why poets are so, English and American writers are so attracted to this poem, especially late 20th century poetry. They've seen so much horror. They've seen so much horror in the 20th century. And Dante, in some ways, mirrors that horror in the Inferno, but also takes us to another place. So, nel mezzo dei cammini di nostra vita, vi trovate in un cielo scuro che la vita era smarrita. And remember, I also said too, that all these rhymes are significant rhymes. You can make a poem just from the end rhymes. Vita smarrita, life lost. Dura paura, hard fright. Morte, scorte, death I've experienced. So there is a sense in which there is a narrative within the narrative within the narrative within the narrative. Okay, I don't know how many of you are poets, but that is just grist for the mill. I mean, that's just great. So let me give you a sense of what's happened to this over the years. This is the wonderful man who actually created helped create Dante's scholarship in the late 20th century. His name is Charles Stevens. And he has produced a prose translation. It's published by Princeton Bullingen Press. The Latin is on one side and the English is on the other. If you ever read Dante, always get side by side. Even if you don't read it down. Because you can say, oh yeah, Morte, I know that word. Oh yeah. You can do it this way. So he translates this way. Midway in the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, where the straight way was lost. Hard it is to tell what that wood was. Wild, rugged, harsh. The very thought of it renews the fear. It is so bitter that death is hardly more so. You all just read that in Italian. Singleton is really, really created late 20th century scholarship on this poem. Because not only did he do this wonderful translation, notice it's volume 1, volume 2 is this immense commentary, an immense commentary. More information than you ever thought you needed about Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, all of whom Dante was a master of. So in a sense, what this poet has done is taken this great medieval tradition of theological and philosophical thought, distilled it, and created this extraordinary, in a sense, poem of pilgrimage and conversion. Perhaps the most important word, the most important phrase in this opening thing is mi ritrovai. Italian, the word for find is Italian. In Italian, it's trovare. Trovare, that's to find. Ritrovare is to rediscover. Mi ritrovai. I rediscovered myself. Mi ritrovai. I remember the story of the prodigal son. There's that great phrase in Luke. When he came to himself, he decided to go back. And here we have, in this dark wood, not of my life, but of nostra vita, of our life. So it's about the pilgrim, but it's also about the reader. It's about you. Now, in the middle of the voyage of my life, in medieval times that would probably be 35. Because there's a psalm that says our lifespan is 70. I'm sorry, 10, 70 years. So I found myself in a dark wood. This is depression. We would think maybe depression. We would think maybe I've made many mistakes and now I can't get out of this. I'm in a mess. And he envisions it as a dark wood, a dark forest. I found myself in a dark forest. Then so mi ritrovai can mean two things. I found myself means suddenly I looked around and I found myself in this forest. Or it could mean it was only in that forest that I began to find myself. this sort of double meaning is recurrent in this poem. And again, it attracts English language. How do I do this in English? How do I get this across? How do I get the subtlety of this across? Which in Italian you can simply do by one word, but I'm going to need more than that. And of course, again, the rhyme is amazing. There's also internal rhyme. Diritta, smarita. The direction, diritta, is lost, smarita. So inherent in the actual word direction is a sense of loss. So it's in the first 3 lines of this immense poem, you have in sense, in small, the entire plot of the poem. How do you find yourself when the way is lost? All right, so let's see what they did. Singleton helped us all to understand the context. But the first American poet who, in a sense, started the Dante revolution in America is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. In Cambridge in the 1870s, he decided to translate his poem, and he collected a group around him to read his poem. That has now developed into the Dante side of America. The beginning of Dante studies began in Cambridge with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And look what he did. He tried to translate those 3 lines. You have it, I think, on your second page. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, where the straightforward pathway had been lost. Not bad, not bad. Now, a couple things to compare. And one thing I didn't mention about Dante, not only did he have all these extraordinary semantic things that he did, also Italian is different from English poetry. Italian poetry is different from English poetry. English poetry, the default in English poetry is go back to high school. Iambic pentameter, right? 5 beats to the line. Da 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 da. Now, bad poets only do da 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 da. Good poets shift it a little bit, always. When in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone bewail my outcast fate. Shakespeare. You can scan it, but you don't. You always expect a kind of shift. Italian doesn't do it by accent. It does it by the number of syllables in a line. There are 11 syllables in a line, always, unless they're not. But that's the rule. So let's count. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. 11 lines, 11 syllables. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Notice I said selva oscura because when you have 2 vowels together, that's 1 syllable. You bring them together. Okay, you're an English poet. You do da 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 da. What am I going to do with this? Okay. Well, what Longfellow did, midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark. He put it in iambic pentameter, right? Because that's what I do. Okay. I found myself within a forest dark, where the straightforward pathway had been lost. And here, of course, he, like a good poet that he is, he varies the accents. After a line that's totally regular, he varies the accents. And he's also made some decisions about translation. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. He calls it the journey of our life. The journey of our life. And la diritta via, the straight way, the straightforward pathway. I'm sorry, diritta via is path. Straightforward pathway sounds a bit like a bureaucrat. I mean, it's not great. It's not great. But he did it, the entire poem. And he started a whole movement in American poetry. Right. Now, let's come to more contemporary. If you turn your page to Robert Pinsky, one of the really finest living poets in America. Pinsky was also a poet laureate for a while. He's now teaching in California. I met him when I was trying to get an academic job at Wellesley, he turned me down. But nonetheless, we're still good. This is a wonderful, wonderful translation. It's in print and nicely has the Italian on one side. Look what he did. Midway, just like Longfellow, midway on our life's journey, I found myself in dark woods, the right road lost. That's one. The right road lost. You notice every word has an accent. Why don't you say it with me? The right road lost. You can't say right road. You have to say right road lost. So he's used the line to actually focus on the loss, About those woods is to tell about those woods is hard. It's a good English monosyllable. It's hard. So tangled and rough and savage that thinking of it now, I fear the old fear stirring. That's cool. That's cool. No, he decided he's not going to try the rhyming because that's impossible. He's not going to try the rhyming, but he is going to have the terses. He's going to keep to the terses. But this is idiomatic English, wonderful English, and it has what to say. Italian has all these words. Dante's vocabulary has resonance to an Italian speaker. What the English language poets want to find is the equivalent resonance in these words for an English speaker. That word savage. The word in Italian was selvaggia. Savage in English has a history. The history, of course, is kind of a checkered history because when Europeans ended up in the North American continent, they encountered what? Savages. And if they were savages, they were less than human. Okay. In the 16th century, there was another spelling for the word savage. Shakespeare knew it, Spencer knew it, the 16th century poets knew it. It was spelled S-A-L-V-A-G-E and pronounced salvage. There was a pun there. You can save the savages. There was it's really the word salvation. So for Pinsky in English, the church to use the word savage, so tangled, rough, and savage, thinking of it now, as a North American, to come into woods and see tangled, rough, and savage, there's a memory here of the so-called discovery of America. When the Europeans landed here, and it was rough and savage. I found myself, it was rough and savage. You see, what I'm saying is that what Pinsky has managed to do is to evoke an entirely different world, a different sound world and a different semantic world, at the same time being loyal to the spirit of Dante's poem. Pinsky's great. Fine poet. Good note. My favorite poet. I'm going to say more about Seamus Heaney in a moment. Seamus Heaney the Irish poet, won the Nobel Prize in the 1970s. One of the finest English language poets in the 20th century. And Dante haunted him. Partly because he was born Catholic in Northern Ireland and came to his university days just as the Troubles were beginning in Belfast. He was in university in Belfast. And so his whole poetic work is meditation on being betwixt and between two fighting cultures. So no wonder Dante, whose poem is permeated by fights between city-states, no wonder it was attracted to him. Here's his opening lines. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself astray in a dark wood where the straight road had been lost sight of. A couple things to say about it. I just love this. For one thing, he has a bit of an internal rhyme. Astray and straight, astray and straight. They're opposites. Via smarita. But also, say that, the third line with me. All right? where the straight road has been lost sight of. What did Churchill say about ending a sentence with a preposition? A sentence is something you should never end it with a preposition with. Okay. Why would he have done this? This is you have to assume with poets, every word has been thought through. Where the straight road had been lost. The line sort of dwindles away in the same way that the sight goes away. How hard it is to say what it was like. And this is my favorite line in the thick of thickets. Can you say that with me? In the thick of thickets. Oh, come on, give me that K. In the thick of thickets. That is Irish writing. He grew up in the thick of thickets in the west part of Ulster. And this is where, he knows what the Italian is. This is he won't, this is about as, how to put it, I won't say Anglo-Saxon because he's Irish. He was very sensitive about that. But this is the English language at its best, the thick of thickets. In some ways, the actual thickness of the verse imitates the thickness of the word. He's great. We're coming back to he. Here's another. This is Mary Jo Bang. Hold the word. What happens when a woman translates something? And she is famous for this extraordinary colloquial version of Dante. Stop. Notice the word. She said, stop. You already stopped. Stopped. Stop. Mid-motion, in the middle of what we call our life. I looked up and saw no sky, only a dense cage of leaf, tree, and twig. I was lost. It's difficult to describe it for us. Here's how wonderfully conversational this is. I mean, she sustains this for the entire poem. This is a kind of a, she changes the sort of the nobility of the Dante narration to this kind of, I'm with you, sitting in the room with you, what we call our life. I looked up and saw the sky. It's as if she's telling you things that you about her own experience. She sustains this tone for tercet after tercet. She's now translated Purgatorio. Who knows what she'll do in heaven? I want to end with this. In Ireland, there is in the west of Ireland, there is a place that's been hallowed for centuries called St. Patrick's Purgatory. It's a pilgrimage site. It's bleak, and Catholics go there, and it's kind of a Lenten discipline. You go and you actually walk barefoot, and there's all these sort of crater-like stopping places, and you basically, it's a penitential journey. He remembers doing that as a boy, and one of his finest collections now is a book called Station Island, because that's what the other name for St. Patrick's Purgatory. It's like Stations of the Cross. You stop, pray, stop, pray. And he imagines himself in middle age, mezzo del cammino di nostra vita, in middle age. He imagines himself going back to Station Island and meeting up with ghosts from his past. Exactly the way Dante does. Dante the Pilgrim does. He meets up, Dante famously throughout the Inferno and Purgatorio, meets up with the shades, the ghosts of people he knew, especially when he's in Purgatorio. He's in the Purgatorio. And by the way, when he's in the Purgatorio, most of the people he meets are painters and poets. I like to think of the Purgatorio as an arts theme park. All the way up, the most extraordinary moments. Well, one of the figures he meets is a cousin of his who kept a pharmacy. This was during the Troubles. And it was the middle of the night, and he was in bed with his wife, and he hears a knock at the window. And there's two men downstairs who want in. They were sick This is all true. They say they have a sick child, they need medicine, and the wife was terrified. The wife was terrified, and he thinks he recognizes the voices, so he goes down, opens the door, and he's shot dead. And it turns out it wasn't clear whether it was the IRA or it was the Prots, but it was one of those random killings. The good thing is that they found the perpetrators and they were prosecuted and put the guy's dead for no reason. He's the one. So he imagines himself at Station Highway, and behind him he senses the ghost of his cousin. So I'll read it to you. Now, you have it all. I had come to the edge of the water, soothed by just looking. I looked over it, as it were, a clear barometer or a mirror. When his reflection did not appear, but I sensed a presence entering into my concentration on not being concentrated as he spoke my name. But before I go on, let me just remind you of what it was like during the Troubles. I'm going to skip here. This is basically what St. Patrick's Purgatory looks like. And this, you can't see very well, but this is a very famous drawing by Botticelli of the Mount of Purgatorio seen from the beach. And here is what he imagines now is the Irish Purgatorio. And that's the gate of St. Patrick's Purgatory. Has anyone ever been there? I've not been there. And this is an old map. You see how long it's been around. It's an old map of the various stopping places. And this tells you, this is to remind you how horrible it was to live in Belfast and to experience those things before the Good Friday Accords. So with all that in mind, this is what Shady, and this is what he said. I needed to butt my way through a blockage, a pile up of hampering stuff, everything that gathered up inside me because of the way I was both in and out of the Northern Ireland situation. I wasn't actively involved, yet I felt dragged upon and put upon by it. Dante was the first mover of the sequence, no doubt about that. The experience of reading him in the 1970s was mighty. And translating this is incredible. So the Ugolino episode was like doing press-ups, push-ups, getting ready for something big. So here's the man. He actually runs into James Joyce. And Joyce says, the main thing is to write for the joy of it. Don't be so earnest. Let others wear the sackcloth and the ashes. Let go, let fly, forget. You listen long enough, now strike your note. Well, that's what he tried to do. He came to the edge. He imagined himself coming to the edge of a water. And it's like Narcissus. He's seeing his own image, but he feels a presence behind him. And though I was reluctant, I turned to meet his face, and the shock is still in me at what I saw. His brow was blown open above the eye, and blood had dried on his neck and cheek. I should say that in the the Purgatorio, Dante runs into Manfred the king, who actually had a scar down his face. So in other words, this is if you know the poem, this is an echo of the meeting with Manfred. His brow was blown open above the eye, and blood had dried on his neck and cheek. Easy now, he said, it's only me. You see men as raw after a football match. What time it was when I was waking up, I still don't know, but I heard this knocking, and it scared me, like the phone in the small hours. So I had the sense not to put on the light, but looked out from behind the curtain. I saw two customers on the doorstep, and an old Land Rover with the doors open, parked on the street, so I let the curtain down. But they must have been waiting for it to move, for they shouted to come down into the shop. She started to cry then and roll around the bed, lamenting to herself, not even asking who it was. Is your head astray? What's come over you? I roared, more to bring myself to my senses than out of any real anger at her. For the knocking shook me, the way they kept it up, and her whinging and half screeching made it worse. All the time they were shouting, shop, shop. So I pulled on my shoes and a sports coat, went back to the window and called out, what do you want? Could you climb the racket or I'll knock him down at all? There's a child not well. Open up and see what you've got. Pills or a powder or something in a bottle, one of them said. He stepped back off the footpath so I could see his face in the street lamp. When the other moved, I knew them both. But bad and all as the knocking was, the quiet hit me worse. She was quiet herself now, lying dead still, whispering to watch out. At the bedroom door, I switched on the light. It's odd they didn't look for a chemist. Who are they anyway this time of night, she asked me with her eyes standing in her head. I know them to see, I said. Something made me reach and squeeze her hand across the bed before I went downstairs into the aisle of the shop. I stood there going weak in the legs. I remember the stale smell of cooked meat or something coming through as I went to open up. From then on, you know as much as I do. Did they say nothing? Nothing. What would they say? Were they in uniform, not masked in any way? They were barefaced as they would be in the day. Ships thinking they were the be-all and the end-all. Not that it's any consolation, but they were caught, I told them, and got jailed. Big limbed, decent, open-faced, he stood forgetful of everything now, except whatever was welling up in his spoiled head, beginning to smile. You put on weight since you did your courting in that big Austin you got the loan of on a Sunday night. Through life and death, you'd hardly aged. There always was an athlete's cleanliness shining off him, except for the ravaged forehead and the blood. He was still that same rangy midfielder in the blue jersey and starch pants, the one stylish on the team, the perfect, clean, unthinkably good. Forgive the way I've lived indifferent. Forgive my timid, circumspect involvement, I surprised myself by saying. Forgive my eye, he said. All that's above my head. And then a stunning pain seemed to go through him, and he trembled like a heat wave and faded. This is channeling Dante, an encounter with an acquaintance who has been martyred. I'll end with that because it's an amazing sequence. But you can see that Dante, having lived all those centuries ago, is alive and well, even in a world on fire. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go preach. See you.
Thank you all so much for being a part of this series. I think it's been a wonderful Lenten series, hasn't it? Some great speakers. Just so you all know, if you're coming back next Sunday, starting next day, we're going to only have the briefest of times next Sunday, where we're essentially going to be doing just an overview of Holy Week and what all of the Holy Week offerings will be, and an opportunity for people to ask, what is the 7 last words service? What is Maundy Thursday? Do we do a foot washing or a stripping of the altar? What are those things, right? So especially good for anybody who's new to St. James or new to the church, or just have some questions about why we do some of the things we do. But it'll also be Palm Sunday, which means we have to get out bright and early so we can get out there and have our palms blessed to begin the procession into the church. So just the heads up for everybody is starting next Sunday. Thank you all so much.